Welcome, everyone, to the International Conference on Consciousness-Based Leadership and Management. This is our opening keynote session, and we are delighted that it'll be led by Dr. Tony Nader, who is the head of TM Movement, and who will be introduced properly by Dr. John Hagelin, the president of MIU, and a renowned quantum physicist and in his own right. So Dr. Hagelin, all yours, please.
It's a great honor and really a great joy to welcome everybody to this international conference on consciousness-based leadership and management, which is an extremely timely and profound as well as important topic. As Anil mentioned, I'm the president of Maharishi International University, which is the world's foremost educational institution based on consciousness-based education. And there also, in the field of education, consciousness is emerging as the, you could say, prime mover, the principal element. And in the context of education, I think it is easy to understand why consciousness is so fundamental. Consciousness, the knower, is that which knows and needs to comprehend and to master all of the material that we are required throughout our educational and professional careers. So without consciousness, there's no wakefulness, there's no alertness, there's no learning, there's no experiencing. Consciousness is absolutely fundamental to life. And as with education, honestly, in every field without consciousness, we as human beings are left with very little. So consciousness is key. And in consciousness-based education, it is education in the conventional disciplines and scientific skills and expertise, but it is fundamentally for the development of human consciousness, the development of intelligence and creativity and learning ability, academic performance, professional competence. These skills are rooted in the development of consciousness, in the development of our full brain potential. Education throughout time has been designed. The very purpose of education is to develop the mind, to develop the brain, to unfold our human resources. Education does that to some degree, but really the core intelligence, the IQ, the fundamental measures of creativity are not actually benefited significantly by education. Education more has been about utilizing the gifts we have that we're born with, our intelligence, alertness, creativity, putting those to work and learning the information necessary to maximize the use of our own capabilities as they are. But education hasn't really focused in the past on the actual increase of intelligence itself, the increase of creativity, the increase of alertness and dynamism, of field independence and all the different measures psychologists use and educators use to gauge the efficacy, the power, the strength of the human brain, to measure the human mind. That mind with which we are born, the brain with which we are born, certainly develops throughout life. And our main speaker coming now is one of the world's greatest experts on brain development. But just it's common sense to say that the purpose of education is to allow us to utilize the creativity we were born with by providing the skills and the information necessary to succeed at this particular time in the history and development of civilization. But education should be more than that. Education, if possible, should actually increase the amount of consciousness that we have. Some people, even wide awake, are a little bit, you could say, on the dimmer or duller side, and other people just shine with intelligence. It's that level of intelligence itself that is so fundamental that if education could just develop that education, along with providing the necessary skills and the knowledge that we expect to gain and need to gain, if it also developed intelligence, if it also developed creativity, that would be the most desirable education possible. And that is the education that we have at Maharishi University, Maharishi International University in the United States. And that is the education I think that we would like to see promoted more broadly throughout the world, because it is that educational system today, uniquely, I would say, that actually shows longitudinal increases in IQ and other fundamental measures of intelligence and creativity that conventional education simply doesn't provide to a significant extent. But now let's switch gears for a moment and introduce our speaker, who is the ideal, very logical and very fortunate keynote speaker to begin this conference. Because our speaker, Dr. Tony Nader, is, I think we could honestly say, and it may seem like a tall thing to say, but I think in this case we can say it, is the world's foremost expert today on consciousness and on the development of consciousness. And consciousness, of course, is by nature a vast and sweeping subject, one that philosophers and psychologists and psychotherapists and many people think about, write about, speculate about. But it is a challenging question. The hard problem in science today, the hard problem in psychology, the hard problem even in physics today is considered to be, what is consciousness? Where does it come from? What are the limits of human potential? And while modern science certainly has made a considerable progress in the understanding of features of consciousness, like how the brain supports memory and certain functions of the brain are becoming well understood and well illuminated, the actual phenomenon of consciousness itself, the fundamental liveliness of the awareness, human awareness, where does that come from? How does the brain produce it? Does the brain produce it? These are deep subjects that people have been grappling with, I would say, for more than hundreds of years. These questions go back to the beginning of civilization. Dr. Tony Nader, with his advanced degrees, his MD, his PhD from Harvard and MIT, is probably, in terms of modern scientific training, with those dual backgrounds in academics and neuroscience and medicine, is well positioned to grasp fully from the scientific standpoint everything that is known about consciousness and how to develop it efficiently. But in addition to his rather stunning, I would say, and rather sweeping comprehension of modern science and modern medicine and modern psychology when it comes to consciousness, in addition to that, he is also deeply steeped in the world's most ancient understanding of consciousness, the world's deep and cherished traditional understandings of consciousness, particularly in the Vedic science, as really revived in a systematic and scientific way in our generation by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who is the founder of Maharishi International University and many other universities all over the world. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi went more deeply into the core reality of consciousness, the understanding of it, and the practical technologies to develop it, to increase intelligence, to expand consciousness, to increase the liveliness of the human mind and all the qualities of creativity and intelligence that come from that. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi really brought to the forefront the techniques from the ancient Vedic tradition, from the tradition of yoga, from the tradition of Ayurveda, and from the many branches of the science that are rooted in the ancient Vedic tradition. Maharishi brought that all out in a scientific way, and he revived the effectiveness and practicality of these techniques to develop consciousness and to promote better health. And he was truly a marvel of our generation. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi worked with the world's greatest experts in these fields of consciousness and health and many others, and prized among all of them, and these were really high-flying scholars in the fields of every field of science and every field of practical application in life. Maharishi worked with the cream of the world, I would say, and really favored among Maharishi for the breadth and depth of his mind was Dr. Tony Nader. With all of his grounding and training in modern science, he also, from his own study and under Maharishi's direct guidance, went probably more deeply than anyone alive today into the Vedic wisdom and the vast Vedic literature. And with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, saw the interconnectedness and the wholeness, and especially the practical application of all of that ancient knowledge as applies to consciousness and to the development of consciousness, and to education, and to health, and to leadership. And he brought that out, coupled with his own background in the modern sciences of consciousness, modern psychology, human physiology, especially brain physiology, as a leading neuroscientist in our world today, put that all together and came out with some extraordinary wisdom and extraordinarily practical wisdom. Summarized, I would say, remarkably concisely and very powerfully in his new book, One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness. And for anyone interested in leadership and development of consciousness or anything to do with consciousness, you really must read that book, because it puts it all together and in the process answers all the deep questions we probably all struggled with and wrestled with as an adolescent, trying to figure out why we're in the world and what is the world anyway, and what is our role in it. And all those questions that you can imagine that people have struggled with throughout time, they all come together in beautiful, I would say, self-evident truths put forward by Dr. Nader, because ultimately the universe is comprehensible. It is knowable. It can be understood, but it just has to be understood on the proper ground. The proper ground really means the understanding of consciousness. So consciousness is the most fundamental ingredient in the universe. As a quantum physicist, I could say that, and any quantum physicist would agree. They would probably use different words. They would say that the unified field or superstring field, which is that unified ocean of pure existence at the foundation of the universe, from which all the fundamental particles and everything made of fundamental particles, which is the whole universe, emerges. That is the most fundamental thing. And that thing, upon analysis, is consciousness in a different language. We call it the unified field. Someone who studies consciousness would call it the unified field of consciousness. And Dr. Tony Nader can explain that better than I, and will not only explain that, but will also, I think, shed light on the immense practicality of the knowledge and application of consciousness to life and leadership. So without further ado, because precious time with Dr. Tony Nader is now with us and limited, let me quickly pass the microphone to Dr. Tony Nader, who is, as was introduced, the head of the global organizations all across the world that teach the Transcendental Meditation technique and advanced techniques of TM, that also have the university systems in the United States and different countries around the world. As a great scholar in his own right, he guides all of that. And in the process have written kind of the ultimate book, I would say, that addresses these deepest questions in the most comprehensible light and in the most practical possible light. And as the global leader himself of a foremost magnitude, I would say, speaking about leadership and speaking about consciousness are right up Dr. Nader's alley. So welcome to this conference, Dr. Nader. We have over 1,000 registered participants in over 400 cities all over the world. And all of these people are well accomplished in their own right. And I also want to just congratulate the organizers of this conference, all of the scholars that have contributed to this conference, everyone who's been motivated to join this conference, because all of you are at the cutting edge, because leadership is key in the world today, no doubt. And consciousness-based leadership is clearly the direction leadership needs to go. So Dr. Tony Nader, please welcome and join us and share with us your thoughts. And I know that some excellent questions have already been submitted for your consideration. And I'll leave it to you and to the conference MC to address the audience, and if time allows, to go through the questions that have been already put forward. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Nader.
Thank you, Dr. Hagelin. It's a great joy to be connected to you personally and to your great university and the leaders that are with this conference, have organized it, will be participating in it. You are yourself a great shining light in the knowledge of awareness and consciousness from the physics perspectives, from the wisdom perspective, and from the teaching and management and organization perspective in this great university of which we are proud, a university based on the development of consciousness, and that has produced so many great research, scientists, thinkers, successful people, and are continuing to spread the knowledge of fullness of life and creating a life which is better for the individual and for society. So it's my great honor and joy to be associated with your university, yourself, and everyone that is participating. I feel you have given a very complete overview of the topic of consciousness and its importance. Consciousness is primary, as you have highlighted in your research and study, and the unified field, which is beyond the surface level of the classical reality and even deeper than the quantum field levels, to something that science is investigating, but that we know yourself and other great physicists have described as something related to consciousness, at least, if not even purely consciousness in itself. It was my great fortune to work with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as you mentioned, and to look into the perspective of consciousness as a primary reality that actually ultimately, through different phenomena of curving back on itself, leads to perception of diversity, and then perception and point of view, if you like, from different angles about itself, and then manifests as actually creation. So the hard problem of consciousness in the modern times, which is how does the physical create the non-physical, the value of awareness, of being, of consciousness, sense of self, sense of continuity, ability to perceive things, experience them, live them, is a hard problem that is not yet resolved at all. And there is not even a hint from modern research for the past 30 years focusing on how matter creates this phenomenon or this reality of consciousness. Of course, there are theories that maybe it is on the level of the quantum fields or the unified field, but they are, of course, remaining as propositions, which can be very interesting. And we have turned the problem around to say, how does actually consciousness appear as matter? And this has been the work that I have been looking into, first with Maharishi, and then under his guidance and direction, continue to put together the necessary logic and the necessary understanding to see how this can be understood, how can this be possible. And I feel, as you have beautifully expressed, that we have now a vision that allows us in a very logical, systematic way, based on many, many factors, including scientific findings, including research on the development of consciousness through transcendental meditation for the individual experiences, and the effects on society through the practice of the collective, a practice of techniques that can change things that are in principle as if outside the physical reality of the individual, but in the consciousness level, they connect to every aspect of society and every aspect of nature through the collective consciousness and the one bounded ocean of consciousness. And therefore, through all these different converging logics and factors and analysis, we can truly say in a very solid way that we have a logic that explains how consciousness can appear as matter and therefore answer the hard problem that has been reversed, that is the hard problem of how consciousness actually appears as matter. And basically, one thing we have to realize is that perception that we have of reality is just that, a perception, an evaluation through our senses of what reality is on the gross level. We see the sun moving in the sky, so we say it moves in the sky. But on a more fundamental level of intellect, we know that it's the earth rotating around its axis, which creates this experience of the sun moving from east to west. And then more scientists, such as Dr. Hagelin, delved and went deeper into the realities of the finer than the finest. So it's a different layer, different levels of perception. And on that level of perception, it is found that reality is not as hard and solid and rigid and fragmented as it appears on the surface, and that there is superposition of states, there is expansion of things throughout the time and space, that time and space are relative, depends on the speed, that there are these factors that have been discovered that show that there are different levels of fathoming what reality is. So one thing we have to understand is that the perception of reality on the surface level through our senses is one aspect, which is one point of view. And this point of view can vary with our own state of consciousness, in sleep, in dream, in waking. It's different. And we know in advanced, more higher states of consciousness, it's also different. We have the states of cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness, that have been described in the ancient Vedic knowledge and the systems of yoga that Maharishi brought to light, and that really lead to a different experience of reality that is on the scale of higher states, more and more unified, so that ultimately the actual experience, even through the senses and through the intellects and through the direct feeling of those who come to that state, they mention, they experience, they say that there is a unity, that there is something fundamental that is at the basis of all what appears as different and segmented, and that this is consciousness, and that this is my consciousness, and it is the one aspect that unifies everything. And this has been theories that have been already presented in the ancient times in, for example, Advaita Vedanta in the most ancient time, and the Tao and the different belief systems, as well as philosophers who talked about monism and idealism and panpsychism. And so this is really something that has been studied and looked at and theorized about. And now we have a complete framework to see how this actually deals or handles or leads to the different levels of experience, the different layers of experience of reality. So if we really just a little bit accept that what we see is a limited aspect of perception, and we have many, many factors that indicate that. We have different damages in the nervous system and the physiology that change, that allows us to see things from different perspectives. There is hallucinogens that makes you see colors in amazing ways. Are they real? In dream state, you see reality that is not there. Is this real, or is it just the functioning of the nervous system? And in that same way, we have a certain level of perception of reality from the waking state that depends on how our nervous system is working. And therefore, all of this to say that we have to let go a little bit of the hard and fast belief that everything is rigid on a classical level as we see it, and accept that there are different ways of perceiving reality. Now, this is not a proof in itself that consciousness is basic, but at least it gives us an open door to understanding why our preconceived idea about reality is not necessarily the real one. And based on that, we can then search for what is the absolute reality that we have in an absolute perception. If we had the more sophisticated instruments, the most sophisticated ability to perceive, what would we perceive? And the answer to that is that we would perceive a state of unity, a state of consciousness all permeating, yet playing within itself, curving on itself, and leading to the whole field of manifestation. In order to go through this, it requires a few steps of logic, of course, and this is explained and can be discussed. Suffice it to say on this seminar that there is a logic, that consciousness can be considered, can be understood as being primary, and from it emerges all the perceptions of reality that are on different levels. And that is what creates our sense of the outer physical universe to be what it is. And there is a way to also explain the forces and the relationships between them and how things emerge and evolve and lead to steps of growth and development, and why is this so, and how it happens, and where does it lead. So this is as a general introduction to the topic. I know I left many questions unanswered because it does take a few steps of logic, and it would be nice to have long seminar, as we had one of them in the Maharishi International University already with the great faculty and with the students, and discussed some of these points. But I understand today there are specific questions that are being posed, and that we would like, that our committee or organizers would like to address. So I'm happy to address those questions that are of interest.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nader. Thank you. Appreciate your wonderful and clear exposition, and along with Dr. Hagelin on what consciousness is and how consciousness is primary. But as you know, there are always questions in people's minds. So 4 of our best students who've been actually the most committed volunteers who have helped to put this conference together. So in a way, this is a reward for them to be asking questions of you. So let's start with Megan. Megan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Dr. Hagelin. Dr. Nader, welcome, and thank you so much for your wonderful book and the opportunity to speak with you today. It's an honor. My name is Megan Anderson. I'm a new MBA student here at MIU studying sustainable business. I'm also a mother of 2 young children who I hope will go to the Maharishi School and gain the gift of learning tools to help them expand their consciousness and spread that into the world, as well as my organization, a New Zealand-based company of hop growers. And I hope to use the information I've learned in your book as well in this program to take forth into the world. Your thesis that consciousness is all there is has important implications for humanity and for the way that existence and purpose is perceived and utilized in our world. So in the spirit of this conference and solving the grand challenges of facing humanity, I have a question for you. And my question is, what are the biggest threats to individual and collective consciousness in the modern world? How more or less conscious is society now than 100 years ago or even 1,000 years ago? And how do you see that in the future? Thank you.
Consciousness is evolving. That's the nature of life, is to evolve. And the more people practice techniques of transcending, the more the collective consciousness rises. So there are threats and situations that seem complicated, there is no question. But there is also greater awareness when we see the awareness about human rights, the awareness about the environment, about the acceptance of diversity, the acceptance of oneness, and the feeling that everyone is connected, that there is a common goal in life, also a common destiny in a sense, that we are one humanity. All of these are really indications of rise in consciousness. And so therefore, there is a great rise in consciousness that has been happening throughout history. When you look at, wars in the past and tribes that used to fight each other and feeling that everybody else is an enemy and trying to, take over and all of that. And you find today that if there is a place in the world that has a problem or a calamity, everybody moves on, brings their help and comes together. People are aware of the importance of protecting the environment, protecting animal life, protecting different values in the environment, the water, the air, and also people coming together, unifying themselves to accept their humanity. And like this, there is a huge development in consciousness. Now, as consciousness rises, there will also be a purification that happens. And that purification leads to the requirement for everyone to evolve. And if they don't evolve, nature pushes a little bit. And that can itself be an indication that there is a need for more and more collective consciousness to be stabilized. So that's why we need larger groups of people who practice techniques of consciousness, such as the city program, group flying, and all the techniques that have been shown. And Dr. Hagelin has himself conducted amazing research on that, which has been published, have been shown that when these groups are there, there is more balance in society, less crime, less negativity, less conflict. And even the history of Maharishi International University and the flying in the domes and the pundits that were there have shown that these numbers are important. So one thing we have to realize and remember and learn is that it's not enough to create an effect momentarily. One has to maintain consciousness. So it's not like you bring the light and then you see and all is fine, and then you take off the light and you expect everything to remain perfect because you brought the light for some time, and therefore people have learned where things are and what to do. It's true that people learn what to do, and for a while there is the effect stays there. But after this light is gone, then the new people or the old even people, they forget and they start again getting into trouble. So the greatest actually threat to the rise of consciousness is not to practice these techniques of development of consciousness, actually. In a sense, it is a platform of help and it gives the solution, but it's also something that becomes a responsibility in order to maintain higher consciousness in society. Now, nature evolves, and as the impetus of the growth in nature happens, there is going to be a push towards higher evolution, and therefore there will be a requirement for people to move to greater understanding, to greater unity, to greater fullness. And if this is not happening and nature is pushing, then there is possibility of having a transition period that is difficult. Maybe we can assume that this is what we are going through now on one level, and that the best, again, way to counteract that is by creating groups and using this technology to raise consciousness.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. And I have one more question. Could you elaborate on your vision for raising consciousness then in the midst of a competitive global environment, and maybe give an example of an organization that's implemented these technologies into its practice and what the results were?
Yes, there are many groups who have used that. Many companies like Bridgewater, for example, with Ray Dalio teaching his executives. And now we've had conferences with Cartier. They are offering to their groups with Pacific Life. They are also offering this technology now more and more. We have had different discussions with Google, American Express, and big companies who are realizing the importance of consciousness and the importance of raising consciousness and importance of giving to their employees this technology of development of consciousness. So what we have to do is keep informing, doing the research, inspiring people, and then it is happening. There is today much more interest in meditation and yoga. This is also an indication of growth in consciousness. So although there is here and there some turmoils and divisions, the indication is that it's moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. Thank you, Megan. Now we'll move to Mr. Vikram Gulati. Thank you, Vikram. Go ahead.
Thank you, Anil. Dr. Nader, first thing, it's a blessing to be here in your presence, though virtually and electronically, but you feel it, just being in the presence. My name is Vikram Gulati. I'm a PhD student in the business department at MIU, and I'm coming back to academics after about 30 years of business experience. 14 of them were as CEO leading various organizations. TM actually has given me the direct experience of something that till then was only a cerebral understanding. So that's been a big change for me. The question I have is that we use the term development of consciousness. Consciousness itself is abstract, and the idea of developing it is even further abstract. And it also doesn't seem like development of something which is like a physical or a mental attribute or a capability. So are you really saying that we ought to be reducing the barriers that inhibit us from experiencing our true nature, which is consciousness? And if that is so, don't you feel we should perhaps change the language to bring that much more clearer?
Yeah, this is a very good point. It's actually, when we say development of consciousness, we should say development of one's own consciousness. Because consciousness itself is an unbounded ocean of pure being. And so you are absolutely right that this primary consciousness is the whole ocean of being, the whole ocean of consciousness. And that we cannot develop. It's infinite, it's unbounded, it's pure. What we develop is our consciousness, ourself, which is limited perspective on what consciousness is, limited perspective on reality, limited perspective on vision. So we can say our awareness, for example, our consciousness, if we want to say our personal small consciousness, is seeing things through specific angles, through specific vision, through specific colored glasses, through specific focus on one thing or the other. See, when the person is stressed, when we go through stress, the nervous system has a tendency to narrow the vision to the danger at hand because there is perceived danger. And therefore, it's the lower parts of the nervous system that come into action, the limbic system, the amygdala, and these parts that deal with immediate danger. And this has come to us as we have evolved, that we were most of the time facing dangers, and therefore that is a priority. So the nervous system gives a priority to protecting itself, protecting the physiology. And so under stressful situation, the consciousness, which means the awareness, the ability to be conscious of things, is narrowed so that we can focus on the task at hand, which is either to fight or to fly, to run away. So this is the fight or flight response, which has a specific hormonal and physical changes that happen, but also has the ability, has the hallmark of reducing the awareness because it reduces the blood flow and the activity of the upper parts of the nervous system, which are the cognitive parts, and particularly the frontal and prefrontal cortex, which is the executive decision-making part of the nervous system. So when this is reduced, we can say this is limited consciousness. So one focuses, but one does not have broad comprehension. So one is not anymore aware of all the possibilities that one has, doesn't see life from a very broad perspective. The perspective, if narrow, is limited. And so when we are under stress, this happens. But when we have stress already in the physiology, we have prejudice, we have misunderstanding of things. That colors also our awareness. And so we see things through colored glasses, and they appear in a way that is narrow, or that is tinted, not clear. And so this is what we really mean. What we really mean is remove those tinted glasses, open your awareness, use your full potential, and then you can actually truly experience consciousness, the unbounded ocean of consciousness. Because before that, you are narrow in your vision. You see a flower, you become the flower, because this is what your ability to see is. And actually rising in consciousness is to free ourselves from the limiting aspects of perception, and be established in the ocean of consciousness within ourselves. That's what we call growing into cosmic consciousness, so that we are liberated from the binding ability or the binding aspect of perception. Because when you see an object, the object takes over your awareness. You see a flower, at that moment you forget who you are, what you're doing, where you're coming from, yourself. You see a flower, the flower becomes the color of your awareness. So in this case, your awareness is overtaken by the objects of perception. Every object you see overtakes you. This is where your consciousness is limited also in its broadness. And liberation or enlightenment, what it really means is very simple, is to experience the ocean of consciousness. So to develop one's own consciousness, in a sense, to free the limitations and the tinted colors that are added, and the stress that is preventing us from seeing who we truly are, which is one unbounded ocean of consciousness. And that is how we say we are developing consciousness. But you are right in the sense that the terminology has to be adjusted or improved in that sense.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. Switching gears a little bit, this conference is, of course, organized by MIU, but it's also being co-sponsored by the Management, Spirituality and Religion division of Academy of Management. And one of the stated goals of this organization is to try and move the consciousness lens to becoming more and more central to both management and leadership. And given that MIU has a preeminent position in terms of consciousness-based education and research, what can we do more actively, especially from the point of view of the book, in helping academia, helping businesses to move this lens from perhaps the materialistic values to more consciousness-based, ways of thinking and paradigms in much quicker time than perhaps that's happening in a normal way?
Yes, from my perspective, of course, the book has been written for that purpose, for the purpose of making the understanding of consciousness a mainstream reality and giving the logic in a sequential way that can be accepted and understood by philosophers and scientists alike, by thinkers, by belief systems, spiritual systems, and by all seekers of truth and reality. And so this is one aspect that we can use to educate the people and allow them to make the jump from a purely materialistic reality to a more complete understanding of true reality, which is that it is all one unbounded consciousness that is curving back on itself and creating these waves, and these waves appear as different phenomena that appear as matter and physical universe and outer reality. This is really no more something as foreign and bizarre as it could have been some years ago, because scientists are facing this question. They have probed deep into the physical, and they found that there is something practically non-physical. So they probed deep into matter, and what they found at the origin of matter, something that is more energy, but even lesser than energy, more abstract, and that it has some connectedness with awareness and consciousness, and they are baffled and they find this weirdness unacceptable or unexplainable, in a sense, not unacceptable because they have to face it. And so there are more and more people who look into this, and this is a very good time to use the university and the intelligence and energy of all those who are open to this and spread the knowledge. And we have to our advantage many things. So we said the science, even the unified field theories are a huge important advantage. We have the actual techniques of meditation that show the individual development, as we said before. We have the collective practice that shows the effect in a serious way. So the collective practice of transcending, creating an effect in society, is another additional support to the logic that there is something more important that happens on the level of consciousness that is unifying the activities, that we are actually one. Of course, as we said, the physics, the quantum field theories, and the unified field theories that actually show that there is a wave function of the universe or something like that, that there is entanglement between different objects, that things are not as hard and fast and defined and separate as we think they are. And now we have the logic. We have also, I did research with Maharishi's guidance on Veda and human physiology that shows that this Veda, which is an expression of consciousness, is structured the same way as the human physiology. And therefore, physiology and consciousness are actually, even on a structural level, on a functional level, the dynamics of consciousness are the same as the dynamics of matter, of the physiology. And so we have so many factors from many sides, and think we have very strong argument to present, and we have to just continue educating the people on the theoretical level so they can see the logic behind it, and on the practical level so that they see it actually works. It actually makes the effect, creates the effect. So for things to be accepted as scientific, you have to have generally not only the demonstration of the cause and effect, but also the mechanism, the mechanics by which the effect is produced from the cause. And then you can see the logical understanding, and you know that the logical connection is not just a chance occurrence, but it's actually based on whatever we know today in science and logic and experimentation.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram. Next, we go to a very young student from across the pond, or closer to where on the other side of the pond, from Scotland, Natalia Fernandez. Thank you, Natalia. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Anil. Hi, I'm Natalia Fernandez. I am a first-year MBA and MA student of Sustainable Business and Leadership in Workplace Conflict Resolution. I'm the founder and CEO of Period, which inspires, informs, and shares stories of premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD for short. I am from Florida, but I have lived in Denmark and in Spain, and I am currently located in the Highlands of Scotland. So thank you so much for your presence here today. It is truly an honor to meet you. The young UK TMers would also like to say Happy World Meditation Day. And so my first question is, you explained that advancing the cause of knowledge is never easy, and that other scientific revelations have been equally counterintuitive and hard for people to digest or accept at all. So are we living in a society that is more open and accepting of these ideas? And have you personally experienced a pushback in the scientific community from spreading the idea of consciousness, especially the theory that consciousness is all that there is?
As consciousness on the collective level and the individual level evolves and grows, and that's what we see really in the world. This was Megan's question. The acceptance of these aspects of reality become more and more easy to pass through. When you go through rigid systems as in the past, of course, there is a difficulty to bypass certain obstacles of entrenched belief systems, such as everything is material. And, because people didn't know, and they didn't know that other than what their senses show them could be real. So if somebody would, if you bring yourself back 500 years or 600 years, and somebody tells you the earth is not still and it's not flat, it's round and it's moving, you can, you say, well, this is a crazy person. Absolutely nuts. They look around, it's not moving. Look at the sun, it's the sun moving. It is flat, absolutely flat, even curves up when you go on the mountain. So how can you say that it's round? If you tell somebody even 150 years ago or even 100 years ago that you can take some little thing, put it in your hand and speak on it, and you can see also people from across the world, in Scotland and in Denmark and in America, they think you are just dreaming, this is fiction. So as science advances and knowledge advances, and as scientists themselves probe deeper into the essence of the material reality, they have discovered that it's really non-material. It is, to the best, to the least, open scientist, it is energy, so it's physical. But energy is based on forces. There are so many forces, and they are more and more unified. So we are coming to a time where things will be more and more accepted. People need to see it happen as far as experiments are concerned, that there is cause and effect, and that there is a logic that makes sense. So I must say I have not had yet a pushback, and that this actually is becoming really interestingly a common point of discussion. Since Maharishi brought the concepts of consciousness and the primacy of consciousness and the unified field being consciousness, and the scientists such as Dr. Hagelin worked with him, and we all worked on the connectedness between physiology and consciousness, and the research I did on that, and started to talk about it. I did the conference Hacking Consciousness at Stanford University, which was very well received. And this actual talks and classes, won a best kind of series in the year for something, whatever it is. And since I wrote also the article on consciousness is all there is in the mathematics journal, you start seeing more and more people talking about consciousness and saying that maybe the universe is conscious, and maybe redefining things is not going to be so difficult. People are more and more open, actually, really more and more open. We have to redefine also consciousness as the unbounded consciousness, but also the concept of being conscious, that it is not just like a human being conscious. Being conscious in the past, 200 years or so, before that, humans used to think that only humans were conscious, that actually animals were not conscious at all. They just decided that animals are not conscious beings. And it takes a big discussion for years and years, and people still today, they think that animal works like a machine and they have no choice. They're nearly not conscious, until modern scientific investigations allows us to see that some animals have a sense of self. They have choices to make. They have family decisions. They grieve on the loss of their relatives or whatever, close ones, and so they are conscious. And no, they are not the same conscious as a human being. Maybe they are, but we don't see them, creating complicated mathematics, formulas, and discovering how the world works, and creating equipment and instruments as sophisticated as we do. So we can assume that we have broader consciousness because we can understand more, we can use the tools, we can like that. But they have some consciousness. So any feeling, touching, experiencing is consciousness. And so if we define consciousness on this scale and we go to the plants and we say, well, the plant senses the sun and responds to the rays and responds to the ingredients in the fields, and they communicate with each other, and there are trees that send branches or roots that communicate with each other and nourish each other, and they respond to music or they respond to different things, then we can say this, we call this consciousness. The problem is, if people try to say, come on, does it mean that the flower has a sense of self and feels what's happening to me and all of that? It's not like that. It's just the sensing, the basic sensing, that is a small, tiny aspect of consciousness. So any sensing, any responding to any force, we are going to call this consciousness. I mean, not the unbounded ocean of consciousness, but a tiny little bit of consciousness. And so everything is consciousness in that way. It's easier to take it from this way and start explaining to people that, if you change your perception of consciousness from a human consciousness in the waking state to anything that's sensing, feeling, touching, whatever, experiencing a force, and say that there is a huge range of consciousness from very little to very enlightened, higher states of consciousness, then people can start saying, oh, okay, that's what you call consciousness. And that is really the beginning of the discussion, in a way, one opening of a door so that you can talk about it in ways that they can relate to. So this is how we have to build slowly the understanding.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'm fangirling right now. Anyhow, so my last question is, you state consciousness is the basis of not only the mental and spiritual aspects of life, but also of all we call matter and energy. So it seems like there are a lot of people living with little light in their life or simply living in complete darkness. How do we translate these applied research findings into our day-to-day life within the business space? And how do we create workspaces in which we do not fall into the trap of contributing to the distractions that prevent us from living a full life?
It's by, again, raising our individual consciousness and broadening it. And how we do that, of course, everything that we learn, everything that we do that is healthy, that is in the right direction can help. You know, you eat the right food, it is better than eating the wrong food and upsetting the physiology, because the physiology is also consciousness. It's patterns of consciousness. So these patterns of consciousness can be rebuilt, readjusted, or destroyed or damaged, and then they reflect a certain quality of awareness, because of course mind and body are intimately connected. If you damage the nervous system, you damage consciousness, because basically the nervous system is itself patterns of consciousness, patterns of consciousness itself. You know, when we say the electron senses the positron and gets attracted to it, we are calling this a tiny little bit of consciousness. And therefore, these tiny little bits of consciousness that happens in the neurotransmitters and the electrical activity of the brain, even on the gross level, as well as on the quantum mechanical level or the quantum field level, they are dynamics of consciousness. And those dynamics, if they are working in the right pattern, with the right network, in the right way, they reflect higher and higher consciousness. That's how it works. So if you do the right thing, have the right thought, have the right experience, if you listen to music that is soothing, if you do something good to your friend, if you enjoy unity, if you work in a group in a constructive way because you feel it's a teamwork, and rather than being defensive and narrow yourself and just me and not the other and like that, and always on the fighting level, you are building greater and greater unity in your awareness, in your way of perceiving things. So everything that we do, everything that we experience, even what we eat, what we hear, what we experience in relationships, at business, has an influence on us. And if we put our attention on it more, on something more, that grows stronger in our life. So if you keep attention on something, that is disrupting, then you are kind of reinforcing those patterns of disruption in your nervous system. So everything that we do can be nourishing, or can be helpful, or can be sometimes a little bit disruptive. Now, of course, the best way to raise one consciousness is to experience the purest, most complete level of consciousness directly. And therefore, to go to the level where consciousness is most unified, most perfect, most orderly, and that is pure consciousness itself. So, as we say, you expose yourself to different things, they have an influence on you, they readjust your system. But if you expose yourself to the most orderly, most profound, most holistic reality, which is pure consciousness and which is yourself, then obviously that has a huge impact on reorganizing the pattern of your functioning, of your nervous system, of your physiology, and reassembling it in a proper way. And so transcending is a key. Practicing the advanced techniques is very important. And every day we close the eyes and transcend, we are retraining, reordering, restructuring our whole pattern of consciousness, which on the physical level we call it the nervous system and brainwave coherence and all of these things. But it's all patterns of consciousness, patterns of consciousness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. We're running a little short on time, but we'll have a couple of questions more, one by Michael Morera and one by myself. So Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. It's very grateful to be here and enjoy with you this opportunity. My name is Michael Morera, original from Costa Rica. And I also work for the HR department, and I study in the MBA program in Sustainable Business. And I have only one question. Having the experience as an MIU student, I had the opportunity to talk with people from different countries around the world. And sometimes they ask me if I believe if TM is a religion because they think it's similar to praying for some reason. I always answer from my experience. I told them that I was raised as a Catholic and I've never felt religion conflict. I say that TM is not a belief system, but I would like to know what is the best way to explain to others that they don't know about TM, saying that it's not a religion. Thank you.
Your answer is already very beautiful, very good. See, religion has do's and don'ts. It has a relationship with God where God gives the laws and how to connect with the divine and how to pray. Praying is asking for things to happen on going out to an outer force that is bigger than us, that is divine reality, and that is one aspect of religion, that is to connect with the divine and to have rules of life, do's and don'ts, and proper behavior, proper relation with others, and all of that, which is very good. In transcendental meditation, we do not tell people what to do, what not to do. We just clean up the nervous system, go back to ourselves, and allow our nervous system to be clean and to have stress being removed. So we are just resting. It's like, sleep is one kind of rest, one kind of consciousness. Dreaming is another kind, waking is another kind. And transcendental consciousness is another kind of consciousness. It's consciousness in which one is very rested yet very alert. And so this hyper alert, high alert, hypometabolic state, which is very depressed and great clarity of mind, is a kind of consciousness, one kind of awareness, one kind of experiencing awareness. During transcendental meditation, you do not pray, or you do not have to have a belief in anything. You don't have to even believe in it for it to work. So there is no belief, as you said, no do's and don'ts, and no things that are related to ways of life. We used to say that, if religion is to invite God to your home, you can say transcendental meditation is like the cleaning system that cleans the home, so that you can invite God to a clean home. So it's a system that cleans your nervous system and prepares it to experience music better, to experience relationships better, to do better exercise, better sport, to be better at school, or if you are devoted to God, to be able to truly be in communication with the divine without the stress and strain and the fears, but from a platform of wholeness, from a platform of serenity. So it gives you the power of being clear and able to communicate with the divine in a more complete way, because you don't approach the divine from a stressed level, but from a more holistic level. And if this Catholic, tell them the Pope has been recently talking about the importance of meditation. He made quite a declaration, which is very beautiful, and that there are many priests and sheikhs and rabbis and Buddhist monks, and they practice transcendental meditation, and they continue in their belief systems.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nader.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dr. Nader. So I'm a professor at MIU, been here for about 9 years, and just to use your cleaning system metaphor, I never enjoyed research. I did PhD in a good school in the US, having done engineering and MBA before. But once I came here, I think the nervous system got purified, especially after Siddhi's. I wrote a book that became a global bestseller on data analytics and then a bunch of things. And we recently did some pioneering research on Vastu and how it improves creativity 60 to 80% within a month or two. And so my question is to all our sort of academic friends who are assembled here, right? How can we become better researchers, right? And how, I just described my experience. So I'm very fascinated with your deep experience of collaboration with Maharishi. How did that go? How did you get to be so close to him? What did you do right that Maharishi worked with you and you came up with this fantastic thing of finding this complete congruence between human physiology and Vedas? I mean, Vedas is that, and this is this. How do you put oil and water together seemingly and create a magical mixture?
I think I was lucky. I had support of nature, but of course, I think when I look at it myself is my trust in what Maharishi was saying, because I come from a tradition of science, which is physical, material, physiological. And I was, of course, in meditation, and consciousness was very important and exploring it. And then when Maharishi said that, consciousness is the basis of matter and that Veda is consciousness, and that the structure of Veda and the structure of consciousness, they have to be the same. And therefore the physiology, because it can transcend and because it can experience unity consciousness, it has also to be under the same structure because it has the same dynamics. And therefore Veda must be in the human physiology. And so instead of arguing in my mind of how this can be and what can it be, etc., I just said, yeah, it must be like that, and let me see how it works. So I asked Maharishi if I should start studying Sanskrit more and going deeper into the Vedas. And he said, no, just study the structure and the function, what each aspect will do. And the function, he defined them. He organized the Vedic literature as 40 aspects, with each having its function, expressing, distinguishing and deciding, expanding, like that. And he gave me a Pandit who was really a great scholar, Pandit Daveji, who knew all these divisions and subdivisions and had many Pandits also involved. And I would meet with Maharishi and would explain to me how this particular part of the Veda works, what it is, what is its function, and what is also its structure, which means how many chapters, as you know, how many divisions and all of that. And so I was trying to translate this in my mind into physiology. Which part of the physiology does this? Which part of the physiology does that? And then I would just say, okay, this is the same function. It's done by this part in the brain, this part in the nervous system, this part in the body, whatever. And then I look at its structure. And this was for me an amazing path of discovery, because nobody really knows exactly how many divisions and subdivisions are in each part of the physiology by memory, by heart. You have to go check it a little bit, because we don't study physiology on the basis of how many divisions, particularly when there are so many large numbers of them. So I would go to the books and open and I say, yeah, this must be around that much. And my astonishment is that to find exactly the same divisions and the same subdivisions. And so that's how it happens on a surface level. What do I credit? I credit my trust and belief in what he said, and my constant search for it, and looking and reminding myself about the physiology and learning about the Veda and looking, and then it came like that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And we appreciate your being with us. We wish there was more time. I know you're a little late where you are also. And we do have another session, but I would thank you. And also just put a feedback form for everybody. If you could just fill out and give us some ideas of what you learned from it and what we can do better. We're always into improving ourselves, just like everybody else on this thing is. So thank you very much. Any last word you wanted to say or?
Thank you again. You're in the right place, all of you, doing the right thing, developing your own consciousness and spreading the light of consciousness to raise human life to where it should be, making life really work for everyone and making it blissful and holistic and creating also peace in the surrounding and hopefully for the whole world through large groups. So thank you for Dr. Hagelin, for the university and all the great organizers and all those who participated.
Thank you very much.